From inside the castle in Owings Mills, Maryland, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer. Jonas, we were just out there in the sweltering heat, enjoying a lovely Ravens training camp practice. Have you already experienced the effects of the sun over the first several days of camp?
You mean, am I sunburned?
Yes.
No, you can see.
You look pretty good.
Getting a nice bronze. By the way, I know we were having some fun yesterday with the Nasty Nate nickname from Marlon Humphrey. So
yes, of Nate Wiggins. Yes,
of Nate Wiggins, and naturally thought, like, what would he call us? For you, would obviously be Podcast Paul.
Podcast Paul, sure.
Me, also going alliterative, but changing up the letters. Would I be Ginger Jonas?
Yeah, and in college, we had to do an alliterative exercise to help people remember our names on the first day,
Okay.
and I went with Fat Paul, Phat, Fat Paul, meaning smart.
Because why?
Because it was clever. What else am I going to say?
Oh,
I didn't have a podcast at that point.
that's true. Life was so miserable for you.
Yeah, I mean, Nasty Nate. What a creative nickname that Marlon Humphrey has.
And that was shot down today by Chris Hewitt. So
really,
yeah, I couldn't hear everything he said, but it seems like the kibosh is put on it for now.
I mean, he's got to prove it.
Yeah, and we can do better than Nasty Nate.
Yeah, I think we can. I think we got to see.
It's like very 90s hip hop coded.
Yeah. Also, Wiggins is you could do much more with Wiggins than you could with Nate. All right. Well, I'm not going to call you Ginger Jonas, but I'm going to call you something Jonas.
Not to my face,
Joyous.
but behind my back.
Exactly. When the cameras are off. Today, we're going to talk about what we heard from John Harbaugh and his comments about Lamar Jackson. We're a few days late to this, but Jonas, we had to chime in on this. We'll touch on that later. But first, Lamar Jackson is back. He showed up back at practice today. Well, back for a little bit. It was a grand entrance, grand exit for Lamar Jackson at practice today. He had shown up the first day, was reporting some kind of symptoms, illness, and was sent home by the doctors. We didn't see him Monday or Tuesday, and today he ran out of the tunnel, and the tunnel created by a bunch of screaming children, onto the field, threw the football around, and then exited slowly, appearing to be under the weather, not injured, but under the weather.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even realize that he'd left until everyone shouted out exactly the fact that he was gone. What did you see from where you were standing?
I mean, I texted you, Jonas, because he was walking right by me, and he was moving very gingerly, but it didn't seem like he was favoring any leg.
Right.
It seemed more like, I am sick, kind of moving gingerly. It could have been, we don't know exactly what his illness was. You know, sometimes if you're sick to your stomach, I'd say it's not the best idea to be out there in 80% humidity.
True.
Also, if you have a fever, any kind of symptoms, this would not be ideal weather for that.
I was wondering if we were going to get a Donovan McNabb barfing on the sideline.
I was very concerned. The way he was moving slowly, we've seen a lot of baseball players have that happen recently. So I didn't want to be in the fray.
Baseball players work hard enough to barf in the sun.
You wouldn't believe it, but yes.
Wow.
Sometimes it's drinking too much Gatorade, not enough. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that we would get a full Marlon today, or a full Lamar today, because then we would probably get a Lamar at the podium session, which is good for content purposes. I imagine that, with tomorrow being the day off, hopefully Lamar is closer to 100% on Friday, and we can talk to him after practice, then get a full sense for what's going on. I've covered Lamar for as long as he's been in Baltimore. I think this is probably the longest stretch of time that he's been sick for in one particular episode.
Other than that, those 5 minutes in the middle of the fourth quarter of a game, but we don't.
Yeah, I mean, he's missed a Wednesday and a Thursday of practice. I guess it was possible that he might have been sick for the Tuesday and the Monday. Obviously, you think back to the Browns game, the Bears game in Chicago a couple years ago, where Tyler Huntley had to come in and be a hero. Lamar was too sick for that. I don't remember how long he was actually ailing for, but yeah, this is I don't want to say a new record for Lamar, but I guess it's good for him that he's getting this out of his system, getting the antibodies in there, but
yeah,
not great timing. And I was just thinking, unfortunately for Lamar, the first big throw that he had was an interception where he was looking for Rashad Bateman. And as I was driving coming up here to Owings Mills, I was like, man, how unfortunate it is for those guys that They weren't able to overlap at all in OTAs. They had like just one good day of minicamp together. And now it's, if Rashad Bateman and Lamar just don't get along chemistry wise this year, the first sentence in the obit for Rashad Bateman's season will be the first pass that Lamar threw to him was picked off by Marlon Humphrey.
Look, you have the power over this, though. You don't have to doom him to that fate.
I know.
You're writing this article.
I do want to say, though, you could just as easily like look back to 2019 when Lamar was coming into his own as a passer. He still had his fundamentals weren't all the way there. And like the first deep pass that he threw in that 2019 preseason was a wounded duck. And he goes on and passes for 36 touchdowns, 6 interceptions.
Yeah, it's like a first spring training start. It's like, what are you supposed to read into this? Especially when you're talking about practice. We're talking about practice. I mean, especially when we're talking about the first week of training camp. I think it's a little premature to jump on that. But I think you can certainly blame his poor performance today on not being 100%. I mean, if he's really still experiencing symptoms, it probably showed up in his performance today. 1 for 5, unofficially.
One of those was a drop pass. The other one was, maybe you chalk that up to Ronnie Stanley for allowing a pressure to Adafe Owe on a screen pass. 1 for 5. No one's going to remember that any quarterback went 1 for 5 at this point in the preseason.
That illness, though, we hope was not spread throughout the Ravens offense because they were certainly showing some signs of illness because Josh Johnson came in and did not throw the ball particularly well. The offense as a whole was not humming. However, the Ravens defense is projected to be one of the best defenses in the NFL this year, despite losing Patrick Queen and all of their Jadeveon Clowney and everybody else. Was this a case in your mind, Jonas, of better defense beating lesser offense?
I think, yes, for the offense not to have the most important player on the field, that certainly goes a long way. But also, I think just in this case, defenses are usually ahead of offenses.
Out there. Huh? They had Pat Ricard out
there. It's tough for these guys, not only I think spacing wise in their route distributions, but you look at how relatively easy it is for some of these guys with a pass rush when they're doing stunts and twists to loop around guards and tackles who just don't have that communication down and are able to have pretty, unabated runs to the quarterback. So you would hope that Lamar coming in, getting up to speed next week when the pads come on, we would have a leveling out. Frankly, I want it selfishly because I'm just sick of writing about the defense dominating day after day. Today was, I think, 7 interceptions. And again, inconspicuously or unfortuitously, the first pass of the game, first pass of 11-11 was Josh Johnson throwing a dump off to Derrick Henry in like the right flat, him bobbling it, which he did in, I think, OTAs or minicamp, and Brandon Stevens picked that one off. Today was Marcus Williams who picks it off, takes it back for a pick 6. And unfortunately for the offense, that kind of set the tone for the day. It was just one good play after another from the secondary, and not a whole lot of ball winners for this Ravens receiving core, wide receivers or tight ends right now. They're going to need someone to step up. Maybe it's as simple as Lamar coming back to help them step up, but it's been incredibly one-sided, I think, through 4 days of practice.
We as a society need to have a Josh Johnson conversation. I think we're going to save that for a separate day because we'll have plenty more podcasts to fill before the start of the regular season. But Jonas, I mean, we're getting closer and closer to the start of the regular season and closer to the reality that Josh Johnson, a 38-year-old quarterback who was QB3 last year, is going to be their QB2 this year. But we'll save that whole conversation for a different day. Let's focus more on the defense today because you wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com where you can subscribe just $1, 100 cents for 6 months about the defense. And how many dimes are in $1, Jonas?
8, 10.
It's close. You wrote about the Ravens defense and the possibility of getting more defensive backs onto the field because this is their most loaded group on the roster. It's perhaps the best defensive backs group in the entire NFL, assuming everybody is healthy. And for right now, most of those players are healthy. And it could be Zach Orr's, prerogative to try to get as many of those guys on the field and just put your best players on the field for as many snaps as possible.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention, and we don't know what the Ravens will need during the season. I don't think Kyle Hamilton was being mean when he said this, but he was right when being asked about this. I think the secondary depth or the safety depth, saying that like we can't have someone be a liability out there on the field, and the Ravens have a lot of guys who at this point do not look like liabilities. At least in the secondary, it's really tough to evaluate inside linebacker play in these kind of settings because they just are kind of there, unless they're getting dunked on repeatedly by tight ends. It's really tough to take note of them. So we don't know how Trent Simpson is doing. You imagine that he'll play a good bit of snaps on early downs because you're not going to have 6 DBs out there trying to stop, rushing offenses that line up and just try to run you over. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But this is a defensive staff that under John Harbaugh, certainly under Wink Martindale, has had some experience with defensive back heavy approaches. You get 3 safeties onto the field, you get 3 cornerbacks onto the field, you take your chances. I think there's things that like Trent Simpson can do that, Kyle Hampton probably could do, but maybe Marlon Humphrey can't do as well. Eddie Jackson probably can't do, our Darius Washington can't do. But I think probably the most interesting consideration on all this is just like, what do you do with these guys on this roster who are doing really, really well in training camp right now, but it's just very tough to imagine them having any kind of role in this defense because, it has been the John Harbaugh, substitution school that if you are a cornerback and a safety and you're 100% healthy and you're playing well, you're going to be out there on the field for close to 100% of the snaps.
Yeah.
So where does that leave Arthur Maulet if he is not, the starting slot cornerback there for more than a series or 2? Where does that leave Jalen Armour Davis, who had an interception today, and that's 4 straight games with a pass defense or an interception? Where does that leave? I don't know, like TJ Tampa, who we haven't even mentioned barely in this podcast because he's been dealing with a sports hernia, but obviously the Ravens are very high on him. So it's going to be, if the Ravens are winning, that's going to paper over everything. But there are going to be some guys who are in delicate situations contract-wise who are going to be wanting to get onto the field but can't because the road to playing time is just so treacherous and hard to get over.
The way the Ravens invested in the defensive backs group, and particularly in the cornerbacks group, told me that they were kind of scarred by the number of injuries that group suffered last season. Marlon Humphrey obviously playing parts of 10 games, not even all of them. Ronald Darby was huge. He stepped up as a replacement for a lot of those guys. Pepe Williams missing a lot of time. Jalen Armour Davis also missed time. That rated from their depth. Kyle Hamilton missed a few games. A lot of these guys suffered injuries throughout the course of last season, and it seemed like that was a definite priority of Eric DeCosta in the front office to go out and build depth upon depth. I almost wonder if they did that too much because now you have, you can never have too many good cornerbacks. I get that, but you have a glut of these guys at this one position, and it may have come at the expense of adding other position groups, adding another wide receiver to that group, adding more along the offensive line. I know they have bodies there, but adding maybe somebody who is closer to starting along that offensive line.
Do we think it's too late to ask Nate Wiggins if he can play 2 ways?
Maybe. I mean, he's 21. He's young.
And he can fly.
Yeah.
Take the top off the defense.
You know what?
Run fast. Forrest Gump it.
Like a Devontae Smith style Slim Reaper.
Yeah,
he's skinny enough. I think that this team, it's a good problem to have, quote unquote. But if all of these guys stay healthy and if TJ Tampa comes back, you're going to have a very hard time fitting all of these guys in. And it's going to be great for Zach Orr to have all these chess pieces.
And it may not, I mean, we don't know what the composition of the Ravens, kickoff team would be or will be. But if they prefer guys who are more linebacker sized than cornerback sized, then that's another path to the field that is taken away from them. And those are important reps in these guys' development.
Can the Ravens roster all of these guys? And if not, are you talking about cutting somebody that you wish you could have, or are you talking about trading guys?
I think they're probably going to keep 10 defensive backs. So I think at this point, that probably means that someone like Pepe Williams is on the outside looking in. Trayvon Mullen, Lamar's cousin, had 2 picks today, but again, he's a guy who's probably closer to the back end of that depth chart than to the front end. I don't. I guess where it kind of gets interesting is like, do they trust in someone like our Darius Washington over Daryl Worley, considering Daryl Worley is maybe better suited for special teams with his size
Right.
than our Darius Washington. You don't see a lot of guys who are 5'8", 180 pounds playing special teams. So is he going to need a standout summer, a standout preseason to really shore things up? I mean, we were talking about him being a guy who, before they signed Eddie Jackson, like might be a starting piece in the secondary, because we didn't know who that was going to be that third safety. But now that you have Eddie Jackson, now that you're bringing back Daryl Worley, maybe we're kind of overlooking the possibility that there's a chance that a guy like Ardarius could be on the outside looking in.
Right. And I also do think there may be a little bit of an overreaction to the signing of Eddie Jackson, which we touched on last week. And we said the upside is certainly there if he can return to maybe not his Pro Bowl form, but his form from 2 or 3 years ago with the Bears. I also did see a lot of talk on social media of, wow, the Ravens undoubtedly have the best safety group in the NFL. I saw RG3 tweet something like the Ravens are really going for it. The Eddie Jackson signing is not, to me, a sign that the Ravens are going for it.
I don't think anyone who signed to a 1-year, $1.5 million deal would be considered a major addition.
In the 3rd week of July.
In hindsight, it could be considered a major deal in the same way that the Ravens getting Jadeveon Clowney for the cut rate, deal that they got last year was a big deal in the figurative sense. But yeah, I mean,
that's not the norm. What the Ravens got from Jadeveon Clowney last year on the 1-year deal is not the norm.
Right.
It is.
People forget about what Rock Ya-Sin didn't deliver here in Baltimore.
Exactly. Which is why you sign a bunch of these guys, because you hope that one of them hits. But what Jadeveon Clowney did last year is not the path going forward. Jadeveon Clowney was also different because he likes to take things up until this offseason. The last couple of seasons, he liked to sign those 1-year deals late in the summer. And that was his signing late was less a reflection of his ability as a player and more of just his preferred style to approach free agency. Eddie Jackson, I think, legitimately was available in mid-July, was cut by the Bears earlier in the season because a lot of teams just don't think he has much left. That isn't to say that he can't play a valuable role for this team, but let's keep in mind that he is playing a third safety role, and I am not all that bullish on what he can contribute this year, but he could prove me wrong.
Yeah, it just comes down to the system. This is great coaches here in Baltimore. Geno Stone was a guy who, was cut from the Ravens after his first year, came back, had to work his way into a role where he was a prominent part of this defense. And we don't know what Eddie Jackson can be, but I think the early returns are good. Having a pick 6 on your second day of practice is definitely a good thing. There's some guys who have been on this Ravens team for a long, long time and don't have a pick 6 to their name in training camp. So we'll see. I mean, he's not over the hill, age wise. Like you said, I think 2 years ago, he was still considered maybe the best member of that Bears defense. There's no reason that with, less responsibility on his shoulders, he can't be a positive, value add to this Ravens secondary. But we just don't know. We don't know what the Ravens think of him. We don't know what the Ravens coaches think of him. We don't know what Patrick Mahomes thinks of him when it's week 1 and then the guns are blazing. So we'll see.
Yeah. All right, Jonas, let's talk about what John Harbaugh said about Lamar Jackson on the first day of media availability. The quote was, "The vision that we have together is that Lamar Jackson is going to become and be known and be recognized as the greatest quarterback ever to play, ever in the history of the National Football League." Jonas, what did you think of this quote?
Who, what, where, when?
Who, what, where, why, how? What was your not? And I hesitate to even go too far on it because it is just a quote. It is just something that is said at a podium. I don't want to go all first take on this, but I think it is certainly notable that he said this, and it was offered up at a time when he didn't have to say this. He wasn't prompted to say this. he offered this information, and he knew that it was going to make headlines.
Do you think if he knew Lamar was going to miss 3.5 days of camp with an illness, he would have said it?
Probably not.
Probably not.
I mean, we still haven't heard from Lamar, so
Yeah,
I would like to hear
think
what Lamar has to say about
inevitably, when Lamar gets asked about this, I think his response will be, "It's cool."
it.
That is his go-to response for everything that to us seems very cool or like over the top acclaim. I think Lamar,
Yeah.
it'll just be like split off his back. I mean, to take it seriously for a second, obviously, John, I think, has always been one of Lamar's biggest boosters. It was strange that he would come out with that so outwardly on the first day of camp, even though obviously you want to set the tone for the offense for your quarterback. It's not like Lamar's ever lacked in confidence. It's not like this is a coach going out of his way to call up the local columnist and say we believe in this guy because he knows that guy will read it. Lamar's always been a guy who has trusted in himself, who's trusted in his ability. Bet on himself that he didn't need an agent and got the richest deal in NFL history done. So the merits of the actual argument are probably what I take issue with, because you can't be the GOAT unless you win a Super Bowl, and you can't win a Super Bowl unless you get to the Super Bowl. And Lamar's come close just one time in his 6 years in Baltimore, and Patrick Mahomes has gotten a lot farther, a lot more often, and there's no real question who among those guys
there's no argument
would be the best active player in the NFL. Doesn't mean that Lamar can't overtake Patrick Mahomes one of these days, but I think it's a bit of a reach in all things to kind of be going out there knowing that Stephen A. and Jim Rome and everyone who wants to get their hands on this red meat is going to be kind of laughing at you on their talk radio shows.
Yeah, you knew it's going to make, and it's funny because he started the answer by talking about how he was reading stuff on social media and online about people being down on Lamar Jackson and criticizing Lamar Jackson, and he was clearly irked by it. But then he put some more fodder, he put some more fish food in the water, and everybody naturally, because we're in July and we don't have actual football to talk about, ate it up. Yeah, I mean, to take it seriously, to take it literally, there's no argument. He has 2 MVPs, but if Patrick Mahomes retired tomorrow, there would still be a conversation between Mahomes and Brady, because Brady still has 7.
Yep.
So Mahomes himself has some more work to do before he cements his case, and Lamar has yet to beat Mahomes in the playoffs. So I don't fully understand why he said it. To say it in private, and I think that's how the initial point was brought up, because he was talking about vision for his team. As a coach, to say that one-on-one, to say that in meetings, to say that to the team, to say that to the coaches, totally, of course. That is what you say if you're trying to get the most out of a guy and you're trying to implant a vision of victory and winning on planting the seed on the first day of camp. But to say it publicly, I don't fully understand the reasoning for it. But Jonas, you also brought up comments that John Harbaugh made before the 2019 season, which was, of course, Lamar's first MVP season, which also drew a lot of attention.
Right.
That ended up being pretty accurate and pretty predictive.
Yeah, if you remember, I think he was on with the NFL Network. I think Brian Billick was on the studio on the kind of panel there that they brought to Owens Mills during a training camp practice, and they're talking about the vision for the offense. It's the first year under Greg Roman, and John Harbaugh, who's obviously a football history nerd, kind of mentions just the various evolutions in the over the course of offensive football, and he basically says kind of outright that what the Ravens are trying to do in 2019 could be revolutionary, with the quarterback design run game. With I don't think he went too much into the specifics because he didn't want to give too much of what they were going to do. But the Ravens went on that year to finish with the most rushing yards in single season NFL history. Lamar obviously won MVP, most rushing yards I think for a quarterback ever in a single season. what they did that year, finishing first in the NFL in rushing efficiency, first in the NFL in passing efficiency. It was astounding. I don't know if the football historians out there will call it revolutionary, but it certainly felt like a sea change in a certain type of, early, late to 2010s, early 2000, early 2020s football.
Yeah.
That was notable. So
It can
when it comes to like John Harbaugh calling his shot, you could say that he's already called his shot and have it work out. But this one, I think, it's probably a bigger a bigger check to cash.
Yeah, not to get off too much on a tangent. It's not too many teams have tried to replicate what the Ravens did, except for apparently the 2024 LA Chargers and hiring Greg Roman, because you need specific personnel for it. I think almost more revolutionary was the Colin Kaepernick season in San Francisco and what that did for the NFL and for the quarterback position.
Right.
Lamar is just one of one. And also that personnel that year was specifically tailored to, you can make a case that the Ravens specifically bought too much into the idea that was the modus operandi going forward.
Right.
That was the way to run an offense.
And it wasn't like anything that the Ravens did that year schematically was new.
Right.
Like that, a lot of the stuff that the Ravens used that year was what Louisville had done in their own offense.
Yeah.
With Lamar. So, again, John Harbaugh can go out there and say whatever he wants. He's a very considered guy, very calculated guy, not in the derogatory way, but this isn't his first rodeo. He's been coaching for 2 decades now. He has over 2 decades of experience about how to set narratives, how to get guys pumped up, how to motivate guys, how to light fire under certain guys. And if he felt like there was any chance that this would backfire, then he probably wouldn't say it. But what are the downsides saying like this besides just having Stephen A just say that this is laughable on first take?
Yeah, and speaking of the possibility that it could backfire, I think back to the comments that Sean Payton made, I believe it was around this time last year, when he was first hired as the Broncos head coach, when he was talking about Nathaniel Hackett and the bad coaching job that he did, and then that ended up blowing up in his face because didn't they lose to the Jets?
They lost to a lot of teams.
Yeah, they did. And but it looked really bad in hindsight and was thrown back in his face. This is one of those comments that has that potential but also who really cares what the internet and what memes are made in January or February? Like his whole argument in the first place was that he didn't care what people thought about Lamar Jackson. So, ultimately, if you lose before you get to the Super Bowl, the criticism is going to be harsh regardless of whether you say this or not.
Steelers fans already are convinced that Lamar can't throw a pass. So nothing that John Harbaugh says is going to change their opinion.
No. I mean, it has the potential to look silly, and it does already look a little bit silly, but I'm not too concerned about the downside of this comment.
And if he's prophetic, then then we're just going to get more crazy John Harbaugh predictions in the future, which I am all for. I mean, it gives us stuff to talk about.
The great thing is we won't have an answer for about 10 years. So
yeah, that's right.
To be considered the GOAT.
It gave us something fun to talk about, and then the Lamar illness kind of shook up the narrative in probably ways that John Harbaugh wasn't expecting.
Exactly. All right, Jonas. Well, the Ravens have the day off tomorrow, and then they throw the pads
Lord knows
on.
the offense needs it.
Yeah. Frankly, you and I need one too. Also, go ahead and say that. And then they throw the pads on for Friday's practice, which will add a new element to all of this. And we will have complete coverage on thebaltimorebanner.com. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. Gianna Hahn will also be back after her European excursion. She's coming right back. Don't worry about that. Kyle Goon has great stuff. Olivia Janik as well, one of our great interns on thebaltimorebanner.com. So please do subscribe to the Banner Ravens podcast. Anywhere that you are listening, give us a like, a thumbs up, write us a 5-star review, and I will read it out here on the show. That is a guaranteed podcast, Paul. Promise. For Joyous Jonas.
Jonas.
Nope. Paul Mancano, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.